I used to believe family was an unbreakable bond, that no matter how life twisted or turned, your blood would stand beside you. But I was wrong. My name is Eleanor Hartman. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in the same blue-shuttered house on Willow Creek Lane for over 40 years. I raised my children here, nursed my late husband through his final illness here, and welcomed every birthday and holiday under this roof. But as the years went by, the faces around my table began to change. My son moved to Colorado, my daughter married and moved to Florida, and my nephews, Jeffrey and Kyle, who once ran barefoot through my kitchen, became men with sharp smiles and empty promises. I suppose it started when my sister passed and left them with nothing but debts. Jeffrey had always been clever. He could charm a snake out of its skin if he needed to, and Kyle, well, he followed right behind, grinning like an obedient puppy. They'd drop by every other weekend, always with some chore to help me with. Fixing a faucet, sorting the attic, reviewing my bills. They'd insist I didn't need to pay them. Family helps family, they'd say. And I wanted to believe it was true. But one rainy Thursday afternoon in March, I learned what they really thought of me. I'd been upstairs in my bedroom folding laundry when I heard their voices drifting up from the kitchen. I paused, a towel in my hands, and listened. Because there was something in their tone I hadn't heard before, something smug. "She's easy to fool," Jeffrey said, his voice low but clear as a bell. "She doesn't even check the statements. We'll get her to sign that power of attorney form by the end of the month." Kyle gave a nervous laugh. "What if she figures it out?" "She won't," Jeffrey snapped. "She's old, Kyle. Old and tired. She's just grateful anyone still comes around." I stood frozen, my heart thudding so hard I thought it might knock the framed photos off the wall. Old and tired, easy to fool. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The trust I'd clung to like a lifeline cracked, and I saw everything in a colder, clearer light. The bills they'd insisted on helping me with. The forms they'd slipped into the stack of legitimate papers. The phone calls they'd ended the second I walked into the room. All the puzzle pieces clicked into place, and the picture they formed was ugly. I didn't make a sound. I set the towel on the bed, straightened my back, and walked quietly to the door. For the next hour, I moved through my house as though nothing was wrong, thanking them for changing the porch light bulb, offering them the last of my lemon cake, pretending I hadn't heard every single word. When they finally left, Jeffrey with his leather briefcase tucked under his arm, Kyle with his eyes darting around like a guilty child, I locked the door behind them and slid to the floor. I wept, but not because I was afraid. I wept because I felt foolish, because I had wanted so badly to believe that even in my twilight years, I was still valued, still respected, still loved. But when the tears were done, I stood up. And I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I picked up the phone, called my attorney, and said, "Marjorie, I need you to come by tomorrow. There's something we have to set straight." By the time the sun rose the next morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I promised myself one thing. The next time those boys walked through my door, they would understand exactly who I was and exactly who they were dealing with. Marjorie arrived the next afternoon right on time, her heels clicking across my front porch like the sharp beat of a war drum. I'd known her for 20 years. She'd handled my late husband's estate, helped me set up my living trust, and every time she left my house, I felt safer. She took one look at my face and didn't even bother with small talk. She set her briefcase down and asked, "Tell me everything." I led her into the kitchen, poured us each a cup of coffee, black for her, sweet with cream for me, and began recounting what I'd overheard. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to stay calm. I told her about the power of attorney document they planned to slip in front of me, about the casual cruelty in Jeffrey's voice when he said I was easy to fool. Marjorie didn't interrupt once. She just nodded, her expression growing darker with every sentence. When I finished, she set her cup aside and pulled a yellow legal pad from her bag. "First things first," she said. "Do you have any signed documents they brought over recently?" I led her to my desk in the back bedroom, where I'd kept every piece of paper they'd ever handed me. Together, we sifted through the piles, receipts, old electric bills, and buried between two property tax statements, a neatly typed form with my name already printed at the top. "Here," I whispered, my heart hammering. Marjorie scanned it. "They were planning to have you sign this. If you had, they'd have access to your accounts, your home, your investments, everything." For a moment, the room swayed. The enormity of it pressed down on my shoulders like a boulder. They would have taken everything I'd built with my husband, everything I'd saved for my children and grandchildren. "I feel so stupid," I said quietly. Marjorie's eyes softened. "You are not stupid. You are trusting. There's a difference. And that trust is exactly why people like them think they can get away with this." I took a shaky breath. "Well, they won't." "No," she agreed, her voice firm. "They won't." We spent the next 3 hours going over every account, every insurance policy, every deed. She helped me reset my online banking passwords and set up alerts so I'd be notified of any changes. She walked me through canceling the automatic bill pays that Jeffrey had arranged to help me. By the time we were done, I felt exhausted but clearer than I had in years. Before she left, Marjorie turned to me and said, "Eleanor, you understand what we're going to do?" I nodded. "Yes, we're going to wait." "Exactly. You're going to let them think you're still unaware, and then, when they come with that document, I'll be here." Her smile was small and fierce. "And we'll see just how easy to fool you are." That evening, I sat alone in my living room, watching the sun set over the oaks that lined the street. I thought about the boys I used to babysit, the ones who ran through sprinklers and asked me for popsicles. When did they become these men who could look me in the eye and plan my ruin? I wanted to believe there was still something decent in them, some scrap of the love we once shared, but as I sat there, I realized that belief was the last lie I was ready to let go of. I went to bed early, my mind buzzing with plans and questions. The next days crawled by, each one a test of my patience. And then, on a Saturday morning when the sky was bright and blue, they came back. Jeffrey with that same polished smile. Kyle with his hands shoved in his pockets, eyes sliding away from mine. "Hey, Aunt Eleanor," Jeffrey called like nothing was wrong. "Mind if we come in? There's something we'd like you to sign." I stepped aside to let them in, my heart calm and steady, because I knew Marjorie was already here, and today was the day I would watch them turn pale. They walked into my kitchen as if they still owned the place. Jeffrey dropped his leather briefcase on my table and flashed me a practiced grin. "Aunt Eleanor, you look wonderful today," he said, his voice coated in that syrupy politeness he thought passed for affection. Kyle hovered behind him, shifting from foot to foot like a schoolboy caught in a lie. I didn't return Jeffrey's smile. Instead, I folded my hands neatly on the table and said, "Sit down." He blinked, clearly thrown off by my tone. "Oh, sure." Kyle lowered himself into the chair beside him. His gaze darted nervously to the hallway, where Marjorie waited out of sight. Jeffrey unclipped his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers, sliding them across the table as though he were bestowing a gift. "We've drawn up a document that will help us manage some of the more complicated things for you. Since you've had trouble keeping up lately." His words were smooth, but the condescension underneath was sharp enough to cut. I picked up the first page and pretended to read, though I already knew every line. I'd spent hours studying it with Marjorie, every clause, every hidden trick. "So," I said, looking up into Jeffrey's eager face, "you're suggesting I sign over power of attorney?" His smile widened. "Only to help you, of course." Kyle cleared his throat. "You wouldn't have to worry about any of the boring details anymore. We'd take care of everything." I could almost feel my late husband's spirit standing behind me. He would have been furious. He trusted those boys once, too. I set the paper down and leaned back in my chair. "I see." For a moment, the room was so quiet you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Then I spoke again, my voice clear and steady. "I have someone here who'd like to join us." Jeffrey's brow furrowed. "What?" I turned toward the doorway. "Marjorie?" She stepped into the kitchen like a storm rolling over the plains. Crisp navy suit, silver hair pinned back, eyes sharp and watchful. She moved to stand behind me, resting her hand lightly on my shoulder. Jeffrey's face lost a shade of color. Kyle went completely still. "This is Marjorie Abbott," I said, "my attorney." For a few seconds, no one spoke. The air was thick with tension. Then Jeffrey forced a laugh that sounded brittle. "A lawyer? Aunt Eleanor, that's not necessary. We're family." "That's exactly why it's necessary," I replied. Marjorie reached over and picked up the document, flipping briskly through the pages. "You know, gentlemen, it's actually illegal to attempt to secure power of attorney through deception or coercion." Jeffrey swallowed hard. "No one is coercing her." "Really?" Marjorie's voice was soft, but her eyes were razor sharp. "Because I have reason to believe you were planning to have her sign this without fully explaining its consequences." Kyle spoke up, his voice cracking. "We were just trying to help. She gets confused sometimes." "I don't get confused," I cut in, my voice rising for the first time. "I get overwhelmed because you've deliberately made things complicated. You hid documents, you slipped papers into my bills, you lied to me." Jeffrey's jaw tightened. "Aunt Eleanor?" "No," I said, standing up. "You don't get to call me that right now." Marjorie laid the document flat on the table and tapped a line near the bottom with one manicured finger. "This clause here would give you immediate control of her accounts, including her investment portfolio and her property. Were you planning to inform her of that today?" Jeffrey opened his mouth, but no words came out. Marjorie looked him dead in the eye. "You should know that any further attempts to manipulate or defraud my client will result in criminal charges, and we are prepared to file them." The silence that followed was so complete it almost hummed. I watched them both, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no fear. I felt something closer to triumph, because they hadn't expected this. They had expected an old woman too grateful for company to question their motives. Instead, they found me standing with my head high and an attorney by my side, and I wasn't finished yet. Jeffrey looked as if he might argue, but the flush creeping up his neck betrayed him. His lips pressed into a hard line, his eyes darting to Kyle for backup. But Kyle just sat there, pale and silent, his hands clenched in his lap. I took my seat again, because I wanted to look them both square in the face when I spoke. "All these months," I began, my voice calm, "you've been coming here with your errands and your help. And I tried to believe you were doing it out of kindness. I wanted to believe that the boys who used to draw me pictures and call me Aunt Ellie still had good hearts." Kyle's eyes watered, but he didn't speak. "But you were counting on that, weren't you?" I went on. "You were counting on me to be too sentimental to notice what you were doing." Jeffrey exhaled sharply. "This is ridiculous." Marjorie tilted her head, her expression unbothered. "If you'd like to leave now, you're free to do so. But before you go, I'd like you to understand exactly what you've walked into." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thin file folder. With slow precision, she set it on the table and opened it. Inside were copies of the emails Kyle and Jeffrey had sent each other, the ones Marjorie's investigator had recovered when I'd asked for help. Kyle made a strangled sound. "What is that?" Marjorie's voice was soft but lethal. "Proof. Proof that you were conspiring to obtain control of Ms. Hartman's assets for your own benefit." I hadn't looked at those emails when Marjorie showed me. It hurt too much. But now I let my gaze drift over the lines typed in casual cruelty. "Once she signs, we can sell the stocks. She won't even realize it. She's half senile anyway. After we get her to agree, we'll start moving the money. She'll never see it coming." I felt the last remnants of my sadness harden into something cold and clean. Jeffrey's mouth opened and closed. Kyle's breathing turned shallow. Marjorie closed the folder. If you attempt any further contact with Miss Hartman outside of supervised visits, I will file for a protective order. Do you understand?" Neither of them answered. "Do you understand?" she repeated, her voice sharp enough to crack glass. Jeffrey swallowed. "Yes," he said finally, his voice low. Kyle nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I leaned forward, folding my hands. "I want you to hear me very clearly," I said. "I loved you both as if you were my own. But you will never set foot in this house again without my permission. You will never speak for me, sign for me, or pretend you know what is best for me. If you try, I will not hesitate to have you arrested." Jeffrey looked up then, his expression twisted with something between anger and shame. "We were just trying to help," he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "You were trying to take." Marjorie stood, her posture tall and unyielding. "I think this conversation is over." I rose too, my legs steady beneath me. "You should go." They gathered their things with none of their usual arrogance. Kyle's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped his phone. As they walked past me, I didn't step aside. I made them brush past me, made them feel the weight of what they'd done. At the door, Kyle paused. His voice was small when he whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Some words were too late to mean anything. When the door clicked shut behind them, the silence felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in months. Marjorie turned to me, her expression softer now. "Are you all right?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." But even as I spoke, I knew this wasn't truly over, because I still had decisions to make about my estate, about who I could trust, and about how I wanted to spend the years I had left. And most importantly, I knew that I would never again let anyone mistake my kindness for weakness. After they left, Marjorie and I sat in the kitchen in silence for a moment. She closed the folder of evidence and slid it back into her briefcase, her expression thoughtful. "You handled that beautifully," she said. I exhaled, feeling the tremor in my chest slowly ease. "I never imagined I'd have to speak to them like that, but I'm glad I did." Marjorie nodded. "People think aging means you're helpless, that you'll be too tired to fight back." She gave a small, approving smile. "You proved otherwise." Her words warmed me more than I expected. For so long, I'd been living with a creeping fear. Fear that I wasn't strong enough to defend myself. Fear that getting older meant I had to accept whatever scraps of respect I was offered. But as I watched Marjorie gather her things, I realized I'd done something I never thought I could. I had drawn a line, and I hadn't wavered. Once she was gone, the house felt different. Not empty, clean, as if all the deceit had been swept out along with them. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and walked it to the living room, feeling my shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. But clarity has a way of making you see everything you've been avoiding. As I sipped from my cup, I began to think about all the other places I'd allowed my trust to cloud my judgment. The monthly drafts I hadn't questioned, the property tax statements I'd signed without reading, the old will tucked away in my file cabinet, written long before my husband died, when I still believed my nephews would be my caretakers someday. I set the cup down and rose. It was time to look at everything with clear eyes. For the next 2 hours, I combed through my records, page by page, making a list of every account, every recurring payment, every document that needed updating. I called Marjorie twice with questions. She answered both times, her voice steady and reassuring. By the time evening came, I had a full list of steps I needed to take. It felt overwhelming, yes, but it also felt like freedom, like reclaiming the ground that had been slipping out from under me 1 inch at a time. Around 7 p.m., the phone rang. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but old habits die hard. I picked it up, pressing it to my ear. It was my daughter, Lila, calling from Florida. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice warm but tinged with worry. "Is everything all right?" Kyle called. He sounded strange. I sat down, feeling a heaviness in my chest. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Actually, no, that's not true. Everything's finally getting better." I told her everything. Every word I'd overheard, every lie they'd tried to slip past me, every piece of evidence Marjorie had uncovered. Lila listened without interrupting, though I heard the sharp inhale when I described the power of attorney form. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Mom," she said at last, her voice low and fierce, "I am so proud of you." Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you." "I mean it," she insisted. "You could have signed and let them walk all over you, but you didn't." I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I almost did. If I hadn't heard them talking— "But you did hear them," she said firmly, "and you acted." She promised to come visit soon, and when I hung up, I felt a peace settle in my chest, because sometimes it takes losing your illusions to see who you really are and who really cares. That night, I slept with the folder of documents locked in my safe, Marjorie's number saved under every phone I owned, and a fresh sense of resolve in my heart, because I wasn't going to spend my remaining years afraid or ashamed. I was going to spend them standing up for myself, and this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, though the ache of betrayal still pulsed beneath my ribs. I moved through my usual routine, feeding the cat, brewing coffee, opening the curtains to let the dawn light spill in, and everything seemed clearer somehow. I knew there would be gossip, that my nephews would tell anyone who'd listen that I was losing my mind, that Marjorie had poisoned me against them. But I also knew the truth, and after so many months of uncertainty, the truth felt like a shield I could finally hold up to the world. After breakfast, I sat at my kitchen table with my legal pad, reviewing the list Marjorie and I had compiled. There were accounts to close, passwords to reset, and a will that needed rewriting. I called Marjorie, and by noon she was back at my door, her briefcase full of fresh paperwork. We spent the next several hours drafting a new will, one that reflected what I had learned about who deserved my trust. My son and daughter, though they lived far away, had never once asked me for a penny. They called out of love, not obligation. And while it broke my heart to do it, I told Marjorie to remove Jeffrey and Kyle from every bequest, every provision, every clause. "They have shown me exactly who they are," I said quietly as I signed the papers. "I believe them." Marjorie placed her hand over mine for a moment, a silent gesture of solidarity. Once everything was notarized and tucked into the new folder, I felt an unexpected calm settle over me. Not triumph, exactly, just a sense of finality, like closing a door that needed to stay shut. Before Marjorie left, she looked me square in the eye. "You did something most people can't," she said. "You stood up when it would have been easier to pretend you didn't see what was happening. You didn't let shame or fear stop you." I swallowed the sudden rush of emotion in my throat. "I don't feel brave," I admitted. "I just feel tired." She smiled, soft and understanding. "That's how you know you did the right thing. Doing the right thing almost always costs something." After she left, I sat in the stillness of the house, listening to the old grandfather clock tick in the hallway. The ache was still there, but it felt different now, more like a scar healing over than an open wound. Late that afternoon, my son called from Colorado. He'd spoken to Lila and heard what happened. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I'm sorry you had to go through that alone." "I wasn't alone," I said, surprising myself. "Not really." Because for the first time in a long while, I hadn't waited for someone else to save me. I hadn't buried my fear in polite silence. I had faced the people who thought they could take everything from me, and I had told them no. He asked if I wanted him to come visit. I told him he didn't need to drop everything, that I was all right. But before we hung up, he said something I'll never forget. "You know, Mom, you've always been stronger than any of us realized." After we hung up, I looked around my kitchen. The same table where my nephews had tried to trap me was now the place I had reclaimed my voice. The same chair where I'd once sat in fear was now where I'd sat in defiance. I made a pot of tea and carried it out to the porch. The evening air smelled like honeysuckle, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. Because I knew that no matter what came next, whether it was more schemes or more gossip or more attempts to chip away at my peace, I wouldn't be caught unaware again, and I wouldn't be easy to fool. A week later, they came one final time. I heard the knock while I was watering the petunias on the front porch. I straightened slowly, feeling my heart give one heavy thump before settling back into its steady rhythm. Through the screen door, I saw Jeffrey standing there, alone this time. His suit was rumpled, and his face looked hollow. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. I set the watering can down and opened the door just wide enough to look him in the eye. "Hello, Aunt Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't answer right away. I studied his face, the lines that had deepened in just a week, the shadows under his eyes. He looked like a man who'd finally been forced to see himself clearly. He swallowed. "I came to apologize." I folded my arms. "You already tried that, Jeffrey, the day you were caught." "I know." His voice cracked. "But I need you to understand. We weren't going to hurt you. You were going to take everything I worked for," I interrupted softly. "That's hurting me. That's stealing my life." His shoulders sagged. I thought you wouldn't notice. Or care." For the first time in months, I felt something close to pity, but it passed quickly. "You thought I was too old to pay attention," I said. "Too lonely to protect myself. You counted on my love for you to blind me." He looked down at the porch boards. "I suppose I did." I studied him for a long moment. "Jeffrey, you need to understand something," I said, my voice steady. "You didn't just take money or trust. You took my peace, my sense of safety in my own home. That can't be undone with an apology." His mouth opened, but I lifted my hand to stop him. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's the truth. I don't hate you, but I don't trust you, and I don't want you in my life anymore." The words hung between us, heavy and final. He nodded, his throat working. "I understand." I stepped back and rested my hand on the edge of the door. "I wish you well. I hope you become a better man than the one who stood in my kitchen and tried to steal from me, but you will not be part of my future." His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought he might argue. But then he just nodded again, turned, and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away until the dust settled on the quiet road. Then I closed the door and locked it. Inside, the house was silent, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt protected. It felt like mine. I walked into the kitchen and picked up the fresh copy of my will Marjorie had sent over. I read every page one last time, making sure every word was exactly what I wanted. And when I was done, I slid it into the safe with a quiet sense of finality. That evening, Lila called again. She asked how I was feeling. "Relieved," I told her honestly, and proud. "Good," she said, her voice warm. "You should be." We talked for nearly an hour, not just about what had happened, but about the future, about how I might come stay with her in Florida for a while, about how I could take up the painting I'd abandoned years ago. After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching the last of the day's light fade over my garden. I thought about everything I'd lost, and everything I'd reclaimed, and I knew that no matter how anyone chose to see me, old, easy to fool, disposable, I would never again see myself that way. I was Eleanor Hartman, 68 years old, a widow, a mother, a grandmother, and I had finally remembered that my life, my home, and my dignity belonged to me alone. And no one, no matter how clever or familiar, would ever take that from me again,